Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Martin, and my friend here and colleague, James Junkin.
It's great to be here. A lot of interaction, a lot of exciting things going on with the risk matrix and safety in general. So I'm happy to get to this episode, Dr. Martin. I think it's one our listeners will really enjoy.
I think so too. So let's take them on into the risk matrix. As you like to say, you're in the matrix, baby. But before that, go ahead and give us a word from our sponsor for today's episode.
Well, this episode, the Risk Matrix powered by Veriforce, is sponsored by a new product of Veriforce, the Veriforce Worker Pass. Veriforce Worker Pass is a comprehensive worker level compliance management solution. It uses advanced technology with seamless integration, and it gives companies the power to establish worker identity and qualifications, as well as monitoring compliance status with a level of precision and efficiency never experienced in the industry. The importance of compliance at the worker level cannot be overstated. At the heart of Veriforce Worker Pass is a refined approach to compliance management that accommodates the needs of a diverse supply chain. So to learn more about how Veriforce Worker Pass can help you achieve supply chain and contractor compliance, reduce risk, and ensure all workers go home safe from high hazard jobs, visit veriforce.com/solutions/worksite-management. I really like that new tool. It's awesome.
Right on.
Awesome.
So let's talk about something in the news today, James. I know that you're preparing an article on this because I think it is a timely, also a very a good learning event for us all, and that is the barge that hit the bridge in Baltimore.
It was a ship, wasn't a barge. It was a big ship.
Ship.
Right?
Container ship. Container ship.
Big container ship. I was off in North Dakota, and like most of my life, I cannot sleep on the road. I'm always thinking about work and safety and things that are going on. And I got up, it was probably 3 o'clock in the morning or something there.
All
Cut
right.
on the news, and what do I see? This huge container ship has collided with this bridge, and they're playing on loop after loop after loop the situation that was going down in Baltimore. And you see this container ship come out of the dark. You could tell it was having problems with electrical power, and it runs right into the bridge. Cars are going across, live video feed, and then the bridge collapses.
I believe there were construction workers on that bridge
seven
too.
Seven workers dead, I think, in this particular incident. So, it got me to thinking about how catastrophic events are rare. They tend to shock the consciousness of the nation. We have the president that went down and observed, and it took me back to things like the BP oil spill when the president came. When the president shows up, something bad has happened. I remember in my earliest memories of President Reagan addressing the nation after the space shuttle exploded, the space shuttle Challenger, and we watched that live as a child. I watched that live at school, and it was sort of a defining moment of our childhood to have something like that happen. People from my generation, didn't experience the Kennedy assassination, but for us, we all remember where we were when the space shuttle exploded. And people from the Kennedy assassination era, they remember where they were when that traumatic event happened. Everybody remembers where they were when 9/11 happened.
I remember when Reagan was shot.
I remember that. Actually. On TV, they showed that over and over again, the Secret Service pounding on people. So there have been events all the way back. If we want to go back to the Hindenburg, that was broadcast on TV. And it's these high impact, catastrophic events that define generations. They don't
Okay.
happen all the time. You're about to say
But they
something.
do happen, but they do happen. And I just want to say one of the things you didn't mention here is the president shows up and then we throw a boatload of money at the problem. Okay, first to fix it, right? But then at the problem, right? So I'm going to mention another one that I know that is near and dear, maybe not. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, to your heart, is Hurricane Katrina, right? We knew there was a
Yeah.
problem with the levees. Uh, we considered it the catastrophic nature of that storm, how often it would happen. We just went with the levees the way that they are, and then the levees broke, and now we have levees built for much more catastrophic events than that.
The cost,
But
I like to put it this way, and we can talk about that. I lived through that experience. And so, the cost of abatement, if you will, correction, corrective action, fixing the problem after the event is always more than the cost of mitigation. It's always
absolutely,
more than the cost
absolutely.
of prevention, right? So I want to talk about that tonight. And I think that's a really good conversation for us to have because, there's routine incidents that happen. They happen to persons. It's horrible. We're dedicated to getting workers home safe from high hazard jobs. But when you see multiple fatalities, when you see hundreds of millions of dollars worth of destruction of assets of companies and of the country, you have a catastrophic failure of your safety management system. And so I'd like to talk about with you and get your thoughts and share some of mine about changing mentalities when it comes to these things. Now, you mentioned Hurricane Katrina, and here's what's interesting about Hurricane Katrina. A year before Hurricane Katrina struck, FEMA, the state government, the local governments in Louisiana had a huge exercise called Hurricane Pam. And Hurricane Pam envisioned being struck up the mouth of the Mississippi River, dead center, New Orleans, a Category 5 hurricane. They did computer simulations and then they tabletop these exercises about what the federal government was going to do, what the state government was going to do, what the local government was going to do, because we knew not only that the levees might fail, but that the levees were more likely to be overtopped. And overtopping the levees like an ice tray, right? We've got an ice tray, we pour water in it, it spills over the neck, spills over the neck, spills over the neck. So no matter whether the levees held or not, we were going to get overtopped by that. And it forecasted devastating flooding in parts of the city. We planned for that. But in the back of
Yeah,
our minds,
I don't think they did plan for that. And I'm gonna
it
stop
all
you right
fell
there.
apart. There's planning and there's way things happen in the real world, and we ought to do an episode on how politics gets involved in decision making processes and emergency management sometime. But there was a plan.
Sure.
There was a
But
plan, but politics got interfered with this about who was going to run some of these things, and when the first responders become the victims that have to be rescued, that's a whole different scenario that wasn't planned for them. But here's my point. We knew that there was problems that needed to be addressed prior to any type of landfalling Category 5 catastrophic hurricane. We knew that.
we knew that long before we knew that long before your tabletop exercise that you talked about, Pam. We knew when we built the original levees that they were insufficient. Prove me wrong.
I can tell you, we knew
We knew that.
I mean, if you want to talk about all the levee situation in Louisiana, I mean, I'm right down the road from the levees, so
I understand. I understand,
I'm
but
right
I
here.
guess what.
So from the levees that were there, the incident investigation after talked about poor construction, inadequate funding, poor oversight. You know, when you think of the levees around New Orleans, you think about the federal levees, okay, that are built by the federal government. But that's not all that protects this community. There are state levees, there are parish levees, there are private levees, and the lower down the food chain you get to less control. Well, if you're a resident who's on the rooftop of your house in a Category 5 hurricane, do you really care about whose fault it was? Right?
No, but you do care about the fact that if we know there's a problem years and years and years in advance, and we're only tabletopping the year before, right? And practicing once or simulating once, that things will fall apart when things fall apart,
we
right?
knew. But here's the other side of that scenario, because I lived through this.
Mm-hmm.
There was a prevailing opinion amongst the citizenry and the government that Hurricane Pam would never happen. It had been since 1964 that a massive hurricane had hit, Hurricane Betsy had hit New Orleans. There was this theory that it would always go somewhere else. And in the days leading up to the hurricane, and if you follow hurricanes after this happens all the time on the Gulf Coast. We start off with a forecast that says it's coming here, and then there are deviations in that forecast. You know, we start forecasting landfall 10 days out, 7 days out, and the National Hurricane Center has gotten better. But there were numerous times that it was forecast to come here, but it didn't come here. And there was an expectancy that it couldn't happen. It just wouldn't, it wasn't going to happen.
Very small.
Saying it's coming here. Oh, no, it's going to Alabama. It's going to go to Alabama. Don't worry about it. It's not coming here until 24 hours before, when reality set in, which is we're not prepared.
Yeah. Well, let me just put this into the context of safety, right? How we do safety, because this really, some of the comments I'll make a little bit later in the show, I think will draw back to this. Is we all love these little pretty colored risk matrices, right? Severity versus probability, and etc., right? And you know, we try to attack as many things as we can to bring them off the risk register, right? And if it's got high severity and very, very low probability, it stays on the risk register, but it really never gets discussed or planned for or given
a lot of resources to it.
Resources, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen, right? It just means low probability. If it does happen, it's going to be severe, which is Hurricane Katrina, which is the BP oil spill, which is this ship hitting the bridge, right? And you know, when we think about these risk matrices as safety professionals, and we're putting our potential incidents into perspective, right, or into budgeting, or into time management, right? It doesn't mean just put it over here in that bright red box, right, or whatever color box it is, right, and keep it on the risk register. It means that you probably should be devoting something to it incrementally over time, so that you are creating a situation where you're not just the year before doing a dry run on Hurricane Pam and doing some simulations and then reassuring yourself that it's still not going to happen, right? If you plan over a number of years for things on your risk register of low probability and high severity, you can incrementally shore up your resources and your potential response such that things like this don't happen. So
So,
let's go back
all
to
right,
this ship and
let's
the
talk
bridge.
about this shift. And I think it comes down, I don't know how many times you use the word if. Okay. And to me, that's the problem in safety. Not that you have a problem in safety. I'm glad you did it because we've talked about this before we got on here, right? About the word if. If
When?
a hurricane hits, if a ship strikes the bridge, if we have a catastrophic failure in the Gulf of Mexico and put 5 million barrels worth of crude oil. When we say if, we're taking that mindset that, yes, it is unlikely to occur given this amount of things, right? And then we
Yeah.
sort of downplay that it's ever going to happen. And we need to change that mindset to when it happens. Okay, let's take the bridge situation. How many ships have passed under that bridge since it was constructed in the 1970s? Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. It's a very active port. I have to do a lot of research.
It
I
is an
really
active
want to do to
port.
figure that out, right? So we understand ships pass under that every day. But it wasn't a matter of if a ship was going to hit the bridge, but when a ship was going to hit the bridge. It might be in
Absolutely.
5 years, it might be in 10 years, it might be in 50 years. It's the same thing when it goes back to Hurricane Katrina. Doesn't mean we're going to have a Category 5 hurricane every year hit the mouth of the Mississippi and drive north. Or when Katrina struck, is actually a Category 3 downgraded to that, but it's a massive storm. Doesn't mean it's going to happen this year, 5 years, 10 years. We had not had a storm like that since Betsy in the mid 1960s, but it was going to happen. It was going to happen. And what the true test of a safety management system is when the rare occurs. Can you absorb it? Can you absorb that blow to the unexpected event and not end up with catastrophic failure?
Are you anti-fragile? And this goes back to something I talked about a long time ago on my own safety struggle podcast, right? And anti-fragility, right? That deflection is so minuscule or so absorbable that it actually spurs you to greater resilience, right? And this was not the case, right? This was not the case. In fact, I've been reading in recent days that not only is this bad, right? I mean, bad money, bad shipping lane, bad, but it's the Army Corps of Engineers actually 3D mapped the destruction in the shipping channel from this bridge and how it needs to be removed and if it can be removed and etc. and how long it's going to take. And it is beyond catastrophic, right? Especially when you're not only fixing the problem over here, but you're trying to fix where the heck are we going to put all these other ships when we have other busy ports that need to absorb that traffic. And that affects supply chain.
It affects the supply chain all the way down to the individual worker that depends upon those jobs that are there. What are we going to do about those guys? I mean, there are companies that woke up the next day and they're like, are we going to have a company? We got debt service to pay. We got employees to pay. We got no activities. So the ramifications of this extend beyond just the individuals that are involved. The 7 individuals that perished, the captain of the ship, the companies that own the ship, their insurance companies. It's literally millions of people can be affected. And it made me think back to the BP oil spill. You know, a lot of my views about safety were formulated because of that event. My interest in process safety. You know, we talk a lot in safety about what I call personal safety. You know, wear your PPE, follow these procedures, watch where you're putting your hands, wear your fall protection, wear your gas monitor. But if you don't, and that fails, and that person ends up is severely injured or killed, that affects that person, that affects that family, that affects their coworkers, but it's isolated to that number of people. Blow a rig up in the Gulf of Mexico and put 5 million barrels worth of crude oil into the Gulf. That affected every person that lived in this country. In this
In this
country.
country?
In this country. And maybe other countries. But I know it affected everybody in this country because I know what the price of gas was 2 days after this on the East Coast. It affected people in shipping communities. It affected folks that lived along the coast. It affected tourism. It affected every aspect of life.
Economics around the world.
And so, you know, how do we prevent those things from happening? And number one, we have to kind of get out of this prevention mindset, I think, and into the, okay, there's going to come a time when, despite our best efforts, our prevention is going to fail. So when that happens, what have we built? How do we respond? How do we have defenses in depth to prevent catastrophic failure? There's been much talk about the bullards and things you could have put around the base of the bridge that the ship could have run into, and it would not have run it into the bridge. Okay,
it might have minimized the damage, right? You may
right.
not have prevented this completely, right? But you might have minimized the economic and supply chain and all these other things. You might have minimized it such that it could have been fixed more quickly, right? And that takes time, and it takes budgeting, and it takes forethought, and it takes recognizing that something on your risk register is not an if.
It's a win.
Always a win. It's always a win.
It may not happen in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You know, if you go back to other examples of like I mentioned, the Space Shuttle Challenger, Morton Thiokol knew they had an issue. NASA knew they had an issue. The were burning through these O-rings in the solid rocket boosters. They had seen that it was burning through, but they had never had a catastrophic failure, right? There was always this, well, if this occurs. There was no when this occurs. Therefore, the decision was made to launch. There were no procedures, no safety considerations, no mechanism to save the lives of the astronauts and crew members inside the crew compartment. None. And reports are that they survived, at least some of them, the explosion, but they did not survive the impact into the ocean. After the event, here comes the mitigation. Now we've got the mechanism they built onto the space shuttle in subsequent shuttle launches for an escape capsule. If something happened on launch where they could get out, you know, and they could be jettisoned from it and have a chute and all those things. Wouldn't that have been nice to have before? Now, I don't know this entered in the minds of NASA, and I'm just speculating here, but it costs money to fly that bird. Lots of it.
Pay me now. Pay me now, or pay me later, James.
So they're like saying, well, what's the odds of this happening? It's high severity, but very low probability. It's never happened before, you know. So it's changing that mindset. And I had to go through an evolution myself in changing my mindset. We had an incident to bring it back from something from a national consequence to the worker level, right? To the company level. We were working in North Dakota, decommissioning a well site. And we had always done this ourselves, meaning we had a crane operator going to lift the tanks up, put it on one of our trucks, strap it down, and our driver's going to take it away. Well, on this particular job, the oil company decided to use a different vendor for transportation. Okay. Somebody we'd never worked with before. We get out there and we've got the tank. We've got it rigged up. We got a crane operator. We got a spotter and signalman down on the ground. We've got a rigger that's in a aerial man lift. And as the load is placed on the back of the flatbed and they're undoing the rigging, guess what happens? Driver pulls off. Driver pulls off, puts tension on that cable from the crane, lifts the crane up on the outriggers. The crane operator's feeding cable and laying down on the horn. The guy in the man basket, of course, we follow the rules. He's tied off inside the man basket. So he jumps outside the man basket because he sees the boom coming toward him, and had the boom fallen, it would have killed him, the spotter, probably the truck driver. He's dangling outside the man basket. Spotter's running. Fortunately, we didn't get past that point of return. And they were able to get the driver stopped, and the crane settled back down on the outrigger boom, and everybody had to go change their drawers. Now, in the investigation, you might say, well, whose fault was that? And I loved our conversation with Chris Martin in the previous episode about blame. But look, you know whose fault it was? It was my fault. It's my fault. Because I never anticipated when this happens, what's going to be our response? Right? So now we're back on the prevention side. How do we prevent these things from happening? And we've got processes in place when we have drivers, and removing the driver from the vehicle and posting, barriers and things so the driver can't drive off and all that other kind of stuff. But I never asked that question. When this happens,
so let me say this, right? I mean, when you talk about when this happens, right? And I'm talking about, risk registers and low probability, high severity, right? I am not implying, right, that we can prevention through design every low probability, high severity thing. What I am suggesting is, as you are, I believe, that we should treat everything as when it happens and include it in our plans, our budgeting, our preparation, so that at a minimum, if we cannot prevent, that we only see that anti-fragile situation where we see a deflection and a recovery, right? Because then we can improve the next time, deflection and recovery. Okay. So you can't, I don't want our listeners to get us wrong here, right? I mean, it would be great to say prevention through the design for everything on the risk register, regardless of whether it happens ever, in a million years.
Let's just be honest. Management is not going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on risk that is not likely to occur, right?
But they might spend a little at a time.
But what you need to be asking is, in these critical functions, like, I don't ever believe you can reduce risk to zero, but you can predict that at some point some things are going to happen. Let me give you an example. We had a Hurricane Harvey, I think it was, struck Houston. Houston's ringed by refineries and chemical plants all over the place. Massive flooding, right? Massive power outages. And when you got flooding situations like that, that really hurts the first responders. A tornado comes down, wipes out a community, we can still drive in there. Hurricane comes and dumps 24 inches of rain on a highway, we're down to helicopters. You're not driving through a lot of that. So there was a chemical plant over there, and y'all can research it if you want to find out more details. But they had a critical process that had to stay at a certain temperature. And so the plant had planned for power outage with a backup generator. However, they didn't plan for flooding to go over the generator and short it out. And that's what happened. Now, it wasn't a matter of if that was going to occur, it was when it was going to occur. It wasn't if it was going to occur, never. It was going to occur. Hurricanes come. They hit the Gulf Coast all the time. There's massive flooding all the time. What were the results of that? The generator tripped offline. There was no way to keep that chemical process cooled. In the midst of a natural disaster, guess what we had? Boom! Fukushima. Fukushima is an example of this. Hey, we don't know if a tsunami is ever going to hit this place this year, next year, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, but we built a nuclear power plant in a place where eventually you're going to get hit by a tsunami and have massive flooding. And what happened? Same thing there. Generators couldn't keep the core cool, couldn't get the power. They lost power to the plant, secondary generators. And what do we get? Nuclear meltdown, right? So my point is, your point. It's not a matter of if, but when. But can your safety management system absorb it? Can you absorb it? It wasn't a matter of if there was going to be a rig explode in the Gulf of Mexico. It was a matter of when it happened. And when it happened, we didn't have the tools necessary to protect the public, to protect the environment, to protect the Gulf Coast. I mean, you know, a lot of that went on for days and months because we didn't have the necessary resources assembled to be able to adequately respond to it. Now, did we learn from that? Yes. Did we learn from the bridge explosion? Yeah, bridge, not explosion, but bridge strike and subsequent destruction of the bridge. Yes, we learned from these things in those instances. So we'll go out there and we'll fix the oil spill response for the Gulf. We'll fix the levees. We'll fix and make sure our generators are higher up. But why does it have to result in a catastrophe in order to put barriers and defenses in place and things we should have anticipated and said, when this occurs, what's going to happen?
When this occurs, how can we plan it into our long-term planning in order to use, for lack of a better way to put it, shorter money over a long period of time, right? Not to prevent it altogether, because I don't think zero is achievable. I don't think prevention through design for catastrophic events is achievable as well, because I mean, unless you're God or some higher power, you're not going to know what the severity is, right? And you're not even going to know the probability, right? You just know it's low. But the takeaway,
a shot in the dark, not me.
Yeah.
A lot of these risk matrices, right, are built on what? Quantitative analysis or somebody's gut feeling?
Somebody's gut feeling, or a bunch of people's gut feelings, right? But the takeaway for a safety professional, right, or takeaway for a community, or a takeaway for people listening to this program is, you know, take a good look at what you're doing for risk evaluation, right? And take a good look at how you're justifying the use of your funds or the non-use of your funds or the size of the funds that you put in, and really evaluating, can I incrementally improve so that when that bad thing happens, I can recover quickly, or I can have some peace of mind that I have some time to respond well enough in order to possibly prevent some really bad things from happening. I mean, I think that's the takeaway of this discussion we're having.
I think so. And it begins, words mean things. Words put in your brain ideas and processes that become deeply suited. So when you say if a meteor falls out of the sky and hits my house, I mean, come on now. But some of this stuff, it may be rare in the calendar of days, but it will happen.
What if some super virus gets released from a lab somewhere in the world and the whole world shuts down? What if? Guess what? You know what? It did. And it has happened before, right? History has shown that something similar has happened and we learned very little, or we forgot what we did learn, right?
Or we failed to apply it to our situation.
Failed to apply it and failed to improve over time. I mean,
Right.
the flu epidemic was what, 1918,
The
1918,
Spanish
right
flu?
around there.
Spanish
Yeah.
flu in 1917 through 1919
I was
killed,
gonna say 1918, so that I got it right in there, right? But
estimates of
that's
50 million people.
over 100 years. That's over 100 years that we could have been, as a government, as a nation, as a global uh, entity, been preparing for this similar type incident. So um, I guess that's what I've got for takeaway from this, James. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I just want safety professionals to move their thinking from if this occurs to an almost certainty of when this occurs. Okay. We want to focus on prevention, right? But we're not going to prevent everything. That's why I have a plan of if we have a serious injury and fatality, I don't have to go out there and draw up what we're going to do in the dirt under all that pressure and stress. I have a plan of action of what we're going to do as a company. We have plans for fires, right? It's not every day the building catches on fire, but we've got an emergency action plan of what we're going to do, where we're going to muster, how we're going to account.
Can it get better? Yes.
Right.
Should it get better? Yes.
So from some of these different incidents that are catastrophic in nature, see, I think when we say severity, catastrophic, meaning we're not going to come back from this unless we have a tremendous amount of help.
Preparation.
We've got to prepare for that so we can take that blow without destroying our entire safety management
and be
system,
resilient,
to develop some resiliency. So that let's take that from, theorizing and look at some of these things that have occurred and draw some lessons for our individual organizations on, hey, when this occurs, what is our ability to recover? One of the lessons that's the takeaway of COVID is business continuity plan. Right? Before that, we didn't have a business continuity plan. People running around. Nobody thought about, well, what happens if we have a catastrophic virus and we shut down and we have to shelter in place at home? Now working from home's normal. Before that, people are like, how are we going to keep our business running? Would have been nice to have that plan before times. So let's learn from these other experiences, apply them to the operations that we have in our organization so we can be resilient in the face of catastrophe.
Anti-fragile.
Anti-fragile.
Absolutely.
Well,
that's a good one, James.
I hope y'all enjoyed the discussion. It's something to think about. Do we have, Dr. Martin and I have the solutions for everything? Absolutely not. But the key to developing solutions and building on the body of knowledge is to ask the questions. So as a safety professional, I'm committed myself to ask the question, when this occurs, what's going to be our response? And I stopped asking if it recurs. So thank you for listening. Thank you for listening tonight. Dr. Martin, for our followers, what do they need to do?
They need to follow us. If they're not following us already, you need to like this episode. You need to smash the subscribe button. You need to share this with your friends. Tell them about it. We are on YouTube, Veriforce's YouTube, in this format here that you see, where you can see us talking and shooting the breeze together. We're also on Spotify, so if you're one of those people that likes to listen in your car or in your earbuds or whatever, you can listen there too. Listen once and listen twice. Share it with your friends. And if you got something to say, please put it in the comments and hit us up on LinkedIn to connect and talk about your experiences on these things. We'd love to have some new guests. So if you got something to talk about, let us know.
Man, I know safety people have got something to say. So hit either one of us up on LinkedIn if you got an interesting take on something, an interesting story. Hey, man, you're just passionate about safety and you want to share your experiences and what's happened in your career with others. We'd love to hear from you. Message us there on LinkedIn. Dr. Martin and I both are on LinkedIn. You can get our names and descriptions of how to find us down into the comment section. But thank you for listening. Until next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe from high hazard jobs.